Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Operation Jericho. Blowing the horns of truth, bringing down the walls of government educational tyranny. Giving the hardcore truth on public education. Sharing hidden information you won't find on any other show. Speaking without the PC saccharin. Taking the gloves off, exposing evil agendas. Parents, you believe that you're sending your children off on that yellow school bus to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. But what are they really learning?
Animal rights trump human rights.
Global warming.
Climate change. Sexualization.
Evolution.
Let's see, sex ed, alcohol ed.
Tonight's homework, write your report on the benefits of Islamization.
Drug ed, death ed.
Anti-Christian bias. How do you spell homosexualization?
Phys ed.
Secular humanism.
Earth worship? Really? Sustainability.
You know, like vegetarianism ed.
Equity.
Diversity.
Sex ed.
I have a friend named Ed.
Today, class, we're going to learn about social justice.
When can I learn how to read?
We know what you're thinking.
Say it ain't so.
It's time to awake, America. Your children have been values clarified, outcome-based educated, mastery educated, no child left behinded, raced to the bottom, teachers unioned, and common cord. And after all of that, they still test at the bottom of the world stage. It's time to get the federal government out of your child's mind and tyranny off your back. We'll show you the solutions, give alternatives, encourage Christians, strengthen churches, join us, stand in the gap, sound the alarm. The walls are tumbling down.
Listeners to Operation Jericho Project Radio. We're so glad you've joined us today. And I'm your host and founder of Operation Jericho Project, Christina Mikas, and I'm joined by my co-host and Operation Jericho Project leadership team member, Angela Bean. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Chris.
Oops, you there?
Hi, Christina.
There you are. So I thought we were going to have some technical difficulties today.
Not today.
Not today, no sirree. This is going to be a great day. And we're joined today by our special guest, Debbie DeGROFF, who's also an Operation Jericho team leadership team member. But she's also a children's literature researcher for over 28 years. And we're going to discuss with Debbie what has been and what is happening with children's literature books that have been and are currently in your children's libraries. There's truly an agenda behind these books, so we want you to really understand this, and we really hope that you'll share this show with several people, because lots of your friends and parents and other, grandparents, whoever, so that they will really understand what's happening to the kids with these books. They're not benign. They're just really, there's a lot of perversion going on, and we need to understand what they're doing to the kids' books and how they're leading these children. So, without further ado, Debbie, I'd like to introduce our guest, Debbie DeGROFF. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, Christina and Angela.
Hey, girl, welcome. This is going to be an exciting little show we're going to have today. I'm really excited.
Well, I am just delighted to be here also, and we're going to be talking about a lot of different topics today in kids' books. But I do want to start out with just a little bit of background information, if I may.
That would be great, Debbie. Yeah, go right ahead, honey.
Well, I'm going to discuss a whole bunch of children's books today, and I know that there are probably some of the people listening to this show today that probably think that this is one area with all the concerns we have that does not and will not affect you personally. But I'm here to assure you that children's literature has affected you, it does affect you, and it will affect you in the future. And we've been so hammered about the importance of reading itself that we forgot to question just what was being read by our children. We didn't realize that the books were systematically stripping away the foundations of Christianity, of our family units, parental authority, and our form of government as well. And in addition, our children have been learning what is now called old-fashioned sex, homosexual and heterosexual sodomy, oral sex, sadomasochism, prostitution, and incest, as well as all the political agendas of the authors and or publishers that are repeated from book to book. And I'm going to introduce several themes today that laid the groundwork to what we're seeing. I will be talking about kids' books from Christian publishers as well as from secular publishers. And one of the early topics that I'm going to begin with today was evolution. And as Christians, we have to think about whether this is an important issue or not. I hear many Christians say that God used evolution to create our world. But I want you to consider Genesis 1:27 today. So God created man in his own image, and Genesis 2:22, and the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman. It's very simple. Creation and evolution cannot both be true. There's so many examples of the promotion of evolution in kids' books that we'd have to have an entire program or two just to deal with them. But these authors are not satisfied just promoting the message of evolution. They also feel a need to ridicule the concept of creationism and those that believe in God as they go along. We lose sight of why it's imperative that we address this issue. You see, if they can make you or a child disbelieve the book of Genesis, how would that child believe any other part of the Bible? How would they know? And what is shocking is the fact that it isn't just secular publishers that have undermined the Word of God. It's also your Christian publishers. So one of the first examples I'm going to go back to is 1964. And in this one, it's called God the Creator by Agnes Hickson. And this was actually prepared by the Protestant Episcopal Church at the direction of their General Convention to teach a second grade course in their schools, in their Sunday schools. And it starts with millions and millions of years ago, and it keeps continuing millions and millions of years ago, and then the rocks appeared, and then the first living things were created. And finally, after millions and millions of years, you get to the page, and it says, when at last man appeared on the earth, he was different from all the other mammals. And most important of all, he wondered about the world and who made it. Now think about that statement. The Bible says that God walked and talked with Adam. And Adam also acknowledged in Genesis 2:23 that Eve was bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. So which is true? The Bible, which is the Word of God, or this book for children? So you see that church kids don't even know the truth. And these kids were probably taken to church faithfully. Another book is for older kids, and it was also a Christian publisher called That Book's Not in Our Library. And what this book was doing was dealing with the evolution versus creationism issue. And they show the teacher as the enlightened, intelligent one, and the people who are for creation, of course, are the simple-minded people. And I'd like to give a few quotes from this book where she tells the girl that evolution, this is the teacher, she says, evolution is only a theory in the sense that theory is a scientific term. It doesn't mean guess. It refers to a system of thought based on careful observation and deduction and was tested by many scientists over the years. The teacher continues, in the Christian book, I don't think anyone seriously believes in creation anymore. In a scientific sense, I mean. There's just too many facts that have been uncovered. There's no question about it any longer. And the child asked the teacher, but why do some people believe in it? She says religious beliefs are hard to change. They've been handed down for generations, and people don't like to think for themselves. It's safer and easier to hold on to old ideas. But we have all of the evidence, a tremendous fossil record that shows intermediary forms of life until man developed. And the girl asks, why is the issue still around? And she says, that's a question I can't answer. Things are flowing more conservatively now. Groups trying to ban Huck Finn, people petitioning school systems to teach creationism along with evolution. And the girl says, at least kids hear both sides. And the teacher smiles and says, that's just it. There are no two sides. It's ridiculous to say that because there's a few missing links in the story that we should assume a creator. That smacks of the days when the natives couldn't understand what made rain, so they invented rain gods. And then it goes on, and the girl asks the one boy in the class that is a Christian, and she says, how can you believe both sides to creation and evolution? And he responds, I haven't run across any serious contradictions yet. And yet, at the end, she questions that same Christian boy, and she says, remember at the funeral home when my grandmother had died? And she said, and he told her that the grandmother was going to heaven if she believed. And she says, you sounded like there was no question about it. And he said, there's not. And she says, but you can't know that. And he says, yes, you can. Now, let's think logically here, okay? How can you know that the salvation message of the Bible is true, but at the same token, Genesis isn't true? How do you get to pick and choose in the Word of God? And this is where we're bringing the kids today. And, of course, in the secular books, every book talks about the billions and billions of years and, in the Big Bang and all of those things. I won't cover those today. But it's an important issue.
Debbie, this reminds me of the climate change issue, because it's like evolution is settled. It's a settled science. It doesn't matter that the stuff doesn't add up, and the same with climate change. It doesn't matter that their statistics don't add up or their information and data, all of that stuff. Nothing adds up. That doesn't matter. Right. It's a science. Just sit down and be quiet and accept it. And that's what they're telling the children about all of this.
You're absolutely right. And those children today, we have to remember, they are children. They're not thinking on the level you are. And these kids are not well educated. They don't have logic. They don't have the reading skills, the history, the science, and the math behind them that the generations prior to them had. And they're just accepting and being swayed of these things that are being put before them.
And we don't necessarily want to assume because a child goes to a Christian school or, has some kind of something in front of it that it's actually Christian. I just ran across some kids who actually they're guests of mine at the moment. And the one girl she's 14, went through Christian school. And I was asking her some questions. Do you know she couldn't even answer me? And she's been in Christian school her whole life, up until now.
Yes.
And she couldn't answer me. It was like, well, what did you learn? Did you guys ever read the Bible? Well, yeah. What did you learn? What did you learn? Did you this? No. I mean, it was incredible. My eyes are like so seriously open. I told you, Debbie, this is I'm watching all these kids and what they're doing, and you think it's going to be difficult to put these kids into technology? I can't get them out of it. So that's why they're doing it that way. But anyway, it's enlightening to see what they don't know, and sadly, the parents are just as bad.
And well, the thing that I want to stress today, the issue, is that these messages are put in book after book after book after book. So many times I've dealt with parents in the past, and they say, oh, well, my child hasn't read that book. And so it's almost like they think that everything is good because they haven't read that particular book. But they're getting the same political and religious and demoralization of the children in most everything.
Yes. And that's
and you know, Christina, as we've talked about before, it's not just the books. They're getting exposed to this in the online curriculums in the classrooms. So even though the parents may claim they're not getting it in the books, they're probably getting it in some kind of online class as well, because those are now required in many states that children participate in those classes.
Yes.
And, you know, it's sad because yesterday I was with 4 parents, and I'm talking to them about Common Core. I'm talking to them about just the topic we're discussing right now. And they looked at me and they said, wow, but that's not in my child's school. I thought I was going to fall off my chair. But this is the typical mentality. Out of 4 parents, every one of them said the same thing. Well, that's not in my child's school. Well, oh, that's not. My children don't learn that. And so I went down this whole list of literature and, you know, different forms of what's happening. And oh no, that's not happening. Oh no. Well, and then we got into the data mining. And we're just going to, I'll quick mention this and we'll go on. And the one turns to me and says, well, I would encourage my children to answer those questions as honestly as they could. And she said, we've got nothing to hide.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I tried to explain to them why it's not about you having something to hide. It's about them taking that information to socially change your child. And they just don't get it because you know why? They're young, and they've already been indoctrinated themselves. They're saying, well, you know, we're really not a free nation, and it's okay. I mean, everything was shocking to me, shocking to hear the words coming out of these parents' mouths. Yeah. So again, we've got a lot of work to do, but let's get back to the books here, Debbie, because we got a lot to cover. But it just goes to show you how severely the children are already being affected. So it's important for us to understand this well. So go ahead, Debbie.
Well, I think I'm going to start with a subject that's easy to cover. We're going to cover profanity. All right?
Okay.
And, of course, when I say profanity, it is not like you're imagining. You're imagining there's a D word or an SH word or something like that. But I'm going to give you an illustration of a book from 2006. And it's called Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist. And it's by Rachel Cohen and David Levison. And, by the way, he is an editor at Scholastic. Okay? This book is on a 5th grade 6-month reading level. There's 275 F words in a 183-page book. Now, I didn't even count all the other words, the profane words. I just counted the F words, 275 in a 183-page book. Okay? And then Scholastic has a push imprint now that David Levison was responsible for, and it's a contest each year to find a new student author between the grades of 7th grade through 12th grade. And if they win, they get, I think, up to maybe 2 summer internships at Scholastic where they help them to write their book. And one of the books that was published was in 2007, and it was called Hail Caesar, and I think the girl was probably 17 when it was published. But this is a book that has 225 F words. Okay? Does that seem like a lot of profanity?
Not in this day and age.
Okay. Well, I just want to tell you, Accelerated Reader is a program that many schools and many libraries use. And the parent or the librarian or the teacher can go to that site, and they have descriptions of each book. So do you think that maybe 275 F words might warrant a warning of profanity?
You would think so, Debbie. Are you saying there's no label on the book to let
let's see what
know?
No, it does not include in the description anything about the profanity. It says high school student Nick O'Leary, member of a rock band, meets college-bound Nora Silverberg and asks her to be his girlfriend for 5 minutes in order to avoid his ex-sweetheart. The co-author is David Levithan. That's all it says, okay? So that's pretty, it seems like something maybe you could give your child, right? Okay, let's read the description for Hail Caesar. 17-year-old Caesar is popular and conceited and doesn't care what anyone thinks of him until a new girl arrives at his school and changes his attitude. Now, by the way, Caesar is somebody who has been sexually active since 7th grade, and the book does mention each one of his latest conquests, okay? But 225 F words. Now, no mention of profanity. On the other hand, I want to read you the description for the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. You ready? Huck Finn, the son of the town drunk, and Jim, an escaped slave, make a break for freedom down the vast Mississippi River on a raft. The plot contains profanity and racial slurs.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I kid.
So how many F words do you find in Huckleberry Finn?
Well, no F words. No F words in Huckleberry Finn.
Oh. Okay.
Okay.
But now today, that's the whole point, and that's what you're saying is the difference. And not to mention, when we'll get to this too, is the links. In other words, the book itself may appear benign or whatever, but then it has references or links. Isn't that right, Debbie? You've often told us that they have these references or links that take the child to, and I'll never forget that one site. I can't even ever get that out of my mind.
Yes.
You know the one I'm talking about.
Yes. What Christine is talking about is on the dust jackets of many of these books, they will direct the children to that author's website. And sometimes when those kids get to those sites link them to worlds you didn't even know existed. And that is very much a danger. I call that following the piper. And so we're not going to discuss a lot of those today. The one that you're talking about that bothered you so much, I'd like to mention here that I still have all of that noted and documented, but he has taken that down.
Really?
Really. That is taken down recently, and he does have something that is even stronger than what you saw before, but it does have an adult label on that, where you must be an adult. But, of course, that doesn't stop anybody. They don't know how old you are when you click the button.
So let's tell the audience so they know what we're talking about, the listeners, what website we are discussing and how that's been taken down now and modified and changed. So what
okay,
was that
I think you were talking about Geography Club, which we'll be talking about in a little bit, and that is by Brent Hardinger.
No, what were the two girls, Debbie, that had their website that they were showing you how to masturbate and how to do all these different things?
This was boys, and this one actually links you to a site called Managing Desire, and it came up with the pictures that actually gave detailed descriptions of how to have different types of homosexual sex.
That's not
and it
the one
also linked. Okay, and it also linked to Planned Parenthood. I'm not sure which one you're talking about, Christina.
The two girls that practiced on an egg, or they taught you how to have backdoor sex. Remember a video after video?
Okay. That's what we'll be talking about in just a few minutes.
Okay,
yes, we'll be talking about that on the nonfiction sex books for children. Would you like to go ahead and address that now?
No, whenever you're ready, Debbie. I just didn't want to leave that one out.
Okay, we'll go to that one.
Parents they need to understand what these links are sending their children to and what these references are sending their kids to. And like Debbie just said, it may be labeled adult, but on the Internet, really, do they know whether you're an adult or not?
Right.
So understand where your kids are being taken. So go ahead, Debbie.
Okay, Christina is talking about a book that came out in 2010 that was called Sex, A Book for Teens, An Uncensored Guide to Your Body, Sex, and Safety by Nicole Hasler. Now, the back of the book does list this book for 15 and up. However, I live in a very small county, and I found this book in the juvenile section of one of those libraries, okay? Now, in this book, this is going to get a little graphic, so please do not have any kids in the listening area. But one of the pages, she talks about fisting. Now, mind you, we're talking for children. Fisting does involve putting a whole hand in a vagina or anus, but the fingers are typically straight with fingertips touching, not curled up in a fist shape. In many, many school systems. And she says the person doing the fisting will, using lubrication and a rubber glove for safety, start with one finger and then another, and with the other person's permission, gradually add another. Fisting is not for everyone. It can be uncomfortable for some people. Fisting is considered an advanced level sex act and therefore not necessarily something to try right off the bat, that carries a significant amount of risk, including the possibility of excessive bleeding due to a muscle tear and a high risk of contracting an STI. It's something that has to be approached with extreme gentleness. And she goes further and explains anal sex for the giver. Even if you want to go fast, ease into it and maintain a speed that is comfortable for the boy or girl who has been kind enough to let you in through the back door. Okay, let's talk about this a little bit. Jocelyn Elders, our former Surgeon General, endorses this book. Okay, that's significant. She thinks this should be on every library shelf and the greatest gift to give someone. But in the end of the book, what Christina is talking about, there are a whole list of resources where they send the children. One of them is to this author's Midwest Teen Sex Show. And that's the site that Christina has never got over at her age. And I cannot imagine what children must think when they go to this site. I cannot imagine what this would do to them. Plus, the other links are in her book. They send you to, the Planned Parenthood sites, the Kinsey Confidential. They send you to the San Francisco sex site. And as soon as you click on the resources on it, it has a glossary, and one of the first things you see is bestiality. And as soon as you click on bestiality, it's like, oh, my goodness, I didn't know these things happened. This is what our young children are seeing. So I think what we have to ask ourselves is, why is it so important to have the kids experimenting with any type of sex, let alone all of the deviancies that they're introducing them to? What would be the plan? And I can tell you this, that most of the books that are very, very graphic sexual in nature are written on 3rd to 5th grade reading levels. And I want you to really, really think about it. Those are very, very low reading levels. That means if they can barely read, in fact, they're probably still basically functionally illiterate, but they can still read these books.
Well, what is interesting, Debbie, is that when you read a description of this book, which you can find it when you Google search Sex, A Book for Teens by Nicole Hasler, Nikol Hasler, the description of the book says that it's a hilarious, honest, and in-depth look at every teen's favorite subject, sex. This isn't your mother's sex book. So, boy, that's appealing for any teenager that, wants to learn about sex. And it's got this cute little cover of cows mating.
Yeah.
So, I would hope that a parent, if that book came home, they would pick that up and go, wait a minute, wonder what's inside this book, because there certainly it's a cute cover, I guess, if you find that cute, but it's, it doesn't it wouldn't be very alarming until you opened it up and started reading. But most parents think their children, when they sign that permission form for their child to participate in the school's sex education class, that they're just learning about the birds and the bees. But in reality, we're teaching our children how to have safe sex in order to avoid the consequences of sex, which is STDs and pregnancy. But we're teaching them all this perverted stuff as well. Is this, I mean, how would a parent find out if this was in their child's classroom? Or is it just in the library that the child can explore on their own?
No, I think you'll see that the sex education programs are introducing things that we would be arrested for if we introduced them to the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Okay, that is significant. And you see, when you're talking about Planned Parenthood, they've since 1974, and you've got the combination, have been teaching that basically that you're nothing more than a prostitute if you're a virgin when you get married, because they say, the price you have to pay is marrying her. See, they encourage the children to experiment, and they tell you that you are hurting your future partner if you do not experiment when you're young.
Well, in fact, they tell them that it's perfectly normal, right, to experience these sexual feelings as early as 11, 12 years old, maybe even earlier, and that you should just go ahead and explore those sexual feelings. They're not actually discouraging the children. And
no, Go ahead, Angela.
I'm saying this is the classroom teacher that is telling the children this. This is not, when we were in school, we just kind of kept it among our peer group. We certainly never had any adults that I recall telling us how to have sex and these perverted sexual activities on top of all of that.
I never had any of none of this. I had none of this sexuality stuff when I was in school, and I was in a lot of different schools all across the United States. But never, ever, ever. And granted, I made it through before the 65 cutoff, but still, we never had the sexuality. And parents, I want you to listen and understand, these books are endorsed by the American Library Association. So these aren't just haphazardly placed. These are actually, there's an agenda and a design behind these, like we keep talking every week about the agenda. Well, these are endorsed by the American Library Association. And, of course, that includes Planned Parenthood. And we know what Planned Parenthood is, the abortion, capital. So when your child brings home books, don't just sit there and let them go, oh, okay, you got a book, isn't that nice, Johnny? No. Check out that book and look at the references and look at the links to where that book is going to take your child. It's really important that you understand how critical. And when Debbie said they're written at a third grade level, I was telling these parents yesterday that, and they're going, oh, well, again, that wouldn't be in my kid's school. So here we are. Search it out, and Debbie will tell you later on in the show exactly, how you can go check and make sure what's in your kid's library. Don't just sit there and say, well, it's not there, because we'll guarantee you we've searched enough libraries across the United States to know they're there. And like Angela just pointed out, It's Perfectly Normal just came out with their latest new great edition. And It's Perfectly Normal by Roby Harris is one of the more benign books, as you'll see as we get into the rest of the show. So understand, and that was given to kids 10 years old in school. So,
yes. And that one actually comes out in September, their 20th anniversary edition. And so they keep adding things, and now they're adding all of the gender information I noticed on the new copy coming out. But Christina and Angela, the one thing that is very important for parents to understand is not only do they have to be concerned about the books that their children might bring home, now many of these books are available as e-books, for their Kindles and their however you do that. But at the library, you just enter your card from home, and if that book's available, it is downloaded right to their Kindle. So that child...
Absolutely. It's interesting that our schools are actually pushing the technology. Our schools, I shouldn't say the school is doing this, is actually trickling down from federal government grants to our state level to increase the, quote, technology abilities of our children. And they are moving away from printed books to providing our students the Kindles and the iPads and all of this kind of technology. And so it's not as if it's going to be easy for a parent to see the books that we used to bring home, 50 pounds of books from school in our book bags, is going to be all on this one little Kindle, unless that parent wants to look at that Kindle every evening to see what new books are downloaded and what the content is. I think a lot of this is going to be hidden from plain view from the parents, and they won't have a clue what their children. So I think this push for technology is really a very dangerous movement that parents need to understand is all part of the agenda to hide from the parents what their children are learning.
Well, Angela, this is I was just talking about here when I have all my grandkids and their friends here, and I have yet to see, other than when they're in the pool or on the back of a horse or doing some activity, they are literally, their faces do not come out of this technology.
Nope.
Literally, not at any moment. They don't even want the TV. Honest to God, we have not turned on the TV in a week because their faces are not out of the technology. I've never seen anything like it in my life. And these are all different age groups, 12 to 14.
Right. And unfortunately, now it's no longer just available for the download to your Kindle. Some of these books are also available as audio downloads. I'm not talking about going to the library and checking out the CDs of the latest bestseller. I'm talking about these are downloadable audio ebooks.
Right. And so they may be listening to them on their iPods or their iPhones.
Yes.
You may think they're listening to music, but they're listening to pornography.
Did that stuff come in on iTunes? I mean, those iPods, is that what they call them?
I don't. I do not know anything about technology, so I can't tell you what they're using. But parents have to be concerned, even if all of these books were absolutely wonderful. If your 12th grader, all of the books that they're reading is on a 3rd to a 5th grade reading level, would that not put a flag up for you?
Yeah. But do the parents know that? That's the question. Do they know it's at a 3rd grade level?
No.
They can look it up, and one of the issues is, you have different types and gauges of reading levels. Accelerated reader is a very, very common one. Lexile is another. Okay, but what they do on accelerated reader, they might say 3.5, and you know that means 3rd grade, 5th month reading level. Now, it might say that the interest level is for upper grades, but it's still the same reading level. When you deal with Lexile, they will say something like 750L or 950L or something like that, and that's harder for parents to gauge. See, they might not know that their child is reading on a 1st or a 2nd grade reading level.
Right.
You understand? Okay. So,
exactly.
These are things that we really, really need to look at. But I don't want to leave here today with people thinking that books somehow just now became bad because of Common Core. Okay, and I want to show you something, 1965, okay? And this is by Maurice Sendak. And I always said, if you say anything derogatory about Maurice Sendak, people want to carry you away in a straitjacket. But I'm going to tell you what his words are, not mine. He says in an article that I took out of my newspaper in 1990, frustrated by what he considered priggish reactions to his stories, In later years, some librarians would draw diapers on Mickey in the Night Kitchen because he was totally nude in this little kid's book. In 1965, Sindak resorted to deliberate sexual symbolism in Hector Protector. He drew a picture of a little boy standing on the back of a lion and holding a fat snake in the queen's face. Because it was based on a nonsensical Mother Goose story, he says, adults overlooked the sexual connotation. Sindak's quote, "But the children read it instantly. Symbolism is the language of children, and I got a bunch of letters from little boys wanting to know if their penises would get big like that." Years later, Sindak says, he told that story at a meeting of librarians. They were uniformly appalled, but it was charming and innocent because it was about dicks, and dicks are charming and innocent. End of his quote.
Now, I'm not familiar with this individual author.
Okay,
how do you
this
spell
was
his name?
the author. This is the author of Where the Wild Things Are.
Oh, okay.
Okay, he was very famous. He was a homosexual, and he died just in the last few years. Okay, Ursula Nordstrom at Harper and Row. She was a lesbian also. She was the children's editor at Harper and Row, and she was the one basically that discovered Maurice Sindak, and that's where he got his start.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is, I would never have gleaned that from reading that book if I was reading that book to my children. If I would have, and I would have said that, you all would have said that my mind was in the gutter. But here's Sindak telling you that that's what he meant, that he used symbolism for the children. He says children read the symbolism instantly. It's the language of children. So you know he used that in many of his books. So, all I'm showing is that in the early 60s, we think that was, way before anything started. But we had, Sid Hoff. He was a cartoonist for Playboy. We had Shel Silverstein. He was a cartoonist for Playboy. You had Gahan Wilson. He was a cartoonist for Playboy. But they all wrote children's books. And I guess you have to ask yourself, how's that happen?
And why did it happen?
Yes, and why did it happen? I mean, were there not other authors out there that were available writing books?
So Debbie, I guess the big question is, has it been a slow transition from the symbolism of Sindak to the outright in-your-face F words and descriptions of sexual acts? And we just, like that frog in the boiling water, we assume the books that our children's libraries would have must still be perfectly fine because we weren't ever exposed to them. And I'm talking about probably grandparents at this stage. Because I feel like our children that are in their 30s now were exposed to these books, and I probably wasn't even aware of it when my children were in school because I didn't pay attention. So,
yeah. And
so what else?
Let me try to answer your question. Okay, I'm not saying that things didn't happen prior to the 60s. I'm just saying most of my documentation starts around the beginning of the 60s. Okay?
Right. Well, I can tell you as a person that graduated in 65 from high school that this stuff was never in any of my schools. When we actually did science and you learned, well, I guess we didn't call it sex ed then, but, we used to have an assembly once a year maybe that they'd show something about, baby being born or whatever. But that was the extent of it. I was just asking my granddaughter, what do they teach? Because I was trying to feel out what's happening in their school. And she says, oh, no, we just do sex ed. And I said, just sex ed. What do you talk about? What are they teaching you? She said, about our vaginas and our penises.
Yeah.
And You know, I mean, so I never had that. Nobody sat there and talked to me about all that stuff. And I graduated in 5. So it pretty much came in after, well, that's, you know, let's face it, God came out of everything, and that's when pretty much this stuff really entered in seriously.
Absolutely. It started coming in like a flood, but the reason that it was allowed to do so is because it wouldn't have entered the mind of a parent to wonder what was in the book. We were just happy to see our children reading. It wouldn't even have dawned on you to even consider something like that, to spend your time reading the book. So,
well, and nor did I ever see anything like that in a book, and I used to be an avid reader. So that's the way it was really changed, I think, after the whole, you know, taking the God thing out. And but I don't want to stray too far, Debbie, because I want to make sure we cover, you know, all these topics of sexuality, Christianity, you know, et cetera. So let's. Did you?
Okay. I'll kind of do that, and at the same time answer Angela's question. Okay, that was 1965 with Hector Protector. In 1969, did we lose our connection?
I'm here.
Oh, okay. 1969, Harper and Row published John Donovan's book, I'll Get There, It Better Be Worth the Trip, with the first homosexual child character. Okay, so that was 1969. 1970, we have Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, by Judy Blume. And I think people still think that that's a Christian book because it says God in the title. But one of the scenes that I'm going to read here, the little girls are all together. I think they're about 12 years old. And they say, all boys of 14 are disgusting. They're only interested in 2 things, pictures of naked girls and dirty books. The day that Gretchen finally got up the guts to sneak out her father's anatomy book, we met at my house in my bedroom with the door closed. We sat on the floor in a circle with the book open to the male body. Do you suppose that that's what Philip Leroy looks like without his clothes on, Janie asked. Naturally, dope, Nancy said. He's male, isn't he? The next page showed the male reproductive system. None of us said anything. We just looked until Nancy told us. My brother looks like that. How do you know, I asked. He walks around naked, Nancy said. My father used to walk around naked, Gretchen said, but lately he's stopped doing it. Now, mind you, these girls are 12 years old. My aunt went to a nudist colony last summer, Janie said. So it says, when you grow up, you'll change your mind, you know, about walking around naked, Nancy told her. You'll want everybody to see you, like those girls in Playboy. What girls in Playboy, Janie asked. Didn't you ever see a copy of Playboy? Where would I see it, Janie asked. My father gets it, I said. Do you have it around, Nancy asked. Sure. So she runs and gets it, and they sit there and they start looking at it, and Nancy opened it right up to the naked girl in the middle. And on the page before, there was a story about her. It said, Hillary Bright is 18 years old. 18! That's only 6 more years, Nancy squealed. You see, what are we introducing? The same year, in 1970, Judy Blume wrote another book. And in this book, she talks, it's called Then Again, Maybe I Won't. And this one is written on a 3rd grade, 6-month reading level for middle graders. And he says, that's when I discovered I could see Lisa's room from my room. With all my lights turned off and her lights turned on, I can see everything she's doing. And what she was doing was getting undressed. That night, I kneeled by my window and waited. Lisa's lights were on and her shades were up as usual. Finally, she came into her room. My hands were shaking. I couldn't even hold my binoculars steady. The view was great, just great. It was like she was standing right in front of me, and I could even see the expression on her face. She was smiling, and then it talked about all the clothes that she was trying on. Okay? 72. Norma Klein writes, Mom, the Wolfman and Me. And her mom has never been married, and so now she's sleeping with the guy that the girl calls the Wolfman. And her friend says, do you mind that he stayed over? And so she talks about it, and her mom says that they have, her and the Wolfman are having sexual intercourse, sleeping in the same bed, and she tells her grandma about how Mom could have a baby, but she wouldn't. She just has sexual intercourse because she enjoys it, she tells her grandmother. And then it says, for the next month or so, the Wolfman slept over on Saturday night almost all the time, and sometimes he came for dinner during the week. Do you see how we're moving up year after year, and we're only in the early 70s?
And what age group would that book have been recommended for?
Middle graders. Middle graders. An interesting one to me is 1973 called It's Not What You Expect by Norma Klein. And in this book, the 18-year-old brother, he's already in college, but he gets his girlfriend pregnant. And the interesting thing that people may not notice until they start looking at the patterns in these books is they introduce the theme of abortion. They tell how much it costs, how easy it is to get one, how they can go and get the abortion and be back before dinner without their parents even knowing, and all those different things. A very, very interesting thing about this is this book was published in 1973. A book just doesn't happen overnight. By the time it goes through the printing and the publishing and the editing and all of those different things, when was Roe versus Wade passed?
When was that, 70s, 80s?
1973. This book was already in the wings, waiting to be published, and introduced the children to the concept and told them how they could get one, what the procedures were, the whole bit. You see, it's woven, the message is woven through the stories.
Yeah.
So anyway, by 75, Judy Blume comes out with a book. In the opening sentences, Sybil Davison has a genius IQ and has been laid by at least 6 different guys. This is the book where the grandmother sends Catherine, who's 17 years old. She knows that she's in a relationship with Michael, so she sends her Planned Parenthood brochures. And it stresses that Grandma is so busy with politics and Planned Parenthood and now to see many clients, even though she's a lawyer that's 70 years old. So this goes through all the details of the child picking up the phone, calling to make the appointment at Planned Parenthood, the procedure, the physical examination they have to have, and then the types of birth control that they have to choose from. And by the way, at the time, in 1982, Judy Blume was on the Board of Advocates for Planned Parenthood, by the way. So they've introduced all that, and they also introduced step by step by step how her and Michael actually have sex. And I am going to read an ending paragraph so that you can get the point. She says, well, it's pretty graphic. But anyway, at the end, she says, and I moved with him again and again and again, and at last I came. I came right before Michael, and as I did, I made noises just like my mother. 1975. And so
obviously, Debbie, in less than 10 years from 1962, when the Supreme Court made that unconstitutional decision that prayer had to be removed from the schools, and in 73 we took out any teaching of Christianity or from Bible. So less than 10 years we've gone from teaching our children Christian morals and values and absolutes of right and wrong to anything goes.
Yes.
Sexually, and of course we progressed on through to other lifestyle choices from there. It doesn't take long for those with the agenda to change the values and the hearts and the souls of our children to implement the programs because we're not paying any attention.
No, and let me tell you some of my theories about why we're not paying attention. I think that there are many people that are aware of things that are in children's books because maybe you have a child that said, Mommy, what does this mean or what is this about? And maybe you're very close to your child and you talk to them about it. But we are at such a place in society today that you would rather be burned at the stake than for somebody to call you that horrible name, censor. You see, that's what they have done. They've made it so you're a good parent if you kind of monitor what your children are watching on TV or what video games they're playing. But if you question anything in a child's book, you're a book censor.
Well, look at what's happening to parents, Debbie, that are questioning it in front of school boards and various things. We had one parent that was taken out in handcuffs.
Yes, he was, and I have that example here today. And yes, I do, and that was a book by Jodi Picoult. And
Debbie, before you describe the book, when you watch the video, and we have that video at OperationJerichoProject.com website, but when you watch the video where the father is handcuffed and removed from the school board meeting because he was protesting the language in this book you're going to tell us about, there was the same father said, look, I'm not asking you to ban the book. This is not a book burning. I just want you to not force my child to have to read it.
Yes, it was required reading.
He was being ridiculed in that room as if he was someone that was a book burner or wanting to censor the freedom to read whatever we chose to read.
Yes.
So just wanted to make that point. It is alive and well today. You'll be called a book burner.
Yes, if you address anything. And
what is that technique? That's the technique of Delphine, visioning, and electric. You put it all together.
Everything Beverly Eckman was talking about.
Exactly. You put it all together, and there is that parent. That's what happened to the parent. You are the crazy, not the book, not the this. You are the crazy. And they Saul Alinsky, throw it all together. That's what's happening to parents today that are questioning. But you can't be intimidated, parents. You cannot be intimidated. You must question. You must bring this stuff to the light.
And so what happens when the real persecution comes?
I'm sorry, what?
What happens when the real persecution comes if we can't even withstand when somebody calls us that name?
Right.
Exactly.
And the lawyer the lawyer that was handcuffed for bringing that book out in New Hampshire, okay, keep in mind he was a lawyer, and he said, quote, if I stood outside the school and I started handing out copies of page 313 of that book, I am confident that I could be arrested for the distribution of pornographic material to minors. And he says, I do not understand why it's okay for the high school to require our 9th grade children to have to read such material, but I get arrested because I want to object to it. Something here is very wrong, he said. And the page he was complaining about is a very graphic scene of very, very rough sex. And at the end it says, semen, sticky and hot, pulled on the carpet beneath her. Matt framed her face with his hands and told her that he loved her so GD much. And she turned her face away and said, I love you too. She lay in his arms for 10 minutes and then said she was tired and needed to go to sleep. After she finished telling Matt goodbye at the front door, she went into the kitchen, took the rug cleaner out from underneath the sink, and she scrubbed it into the wet spot on the carpet and prayed it wouldn't leave a stain. Now, mind you, I left out most of the page. I was just reading you the end of it. But that's the page he was objecting to. Now, what I want to bring up here is after that case came up, I purchased that book and I read the whole thing. And I have to tell you, that book really wasn't written for children to begin with. However, it is required in quite a few schools. That is required reading material. But most of the children's books that I read that are sexual in nature are much more graphic than that book was.
Well, Debbie,
think about that.
I don't want to run out of time without, getting to these topics because they're all so important. So we pretty well, I think, covered sexuality, but Christianity, homosexuality.
Okay. All right. Which one do you want to hit first?
Well, let's go with Christianity, just so parents. I mean, we touched on it lightly, so let's finish that off, and then just kind of hit on the homosexuality, the transgender, that category, and then nonfiction sex books for kids.
Okay, we pretty much did that with the Nicole Hasler. Well,
okay, great.
I mean, there's others. But we'll start with the Christianity, and I just want to show how little things have filtered in. Now, one of the books that most even Christian bookstores sell, and so do New Age bookstores, are Madeline Engel's books, The Wrinkle in Time. But from a Christian point of view, she says, "Who have our fighters been?" Calvin asked. And she says, "Oh, you must know them, dear, and the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not." "Jesus," Charles Wallace said. "Why, of course, Jesus." "Go on, Charles Love. There were others, all your great artists. They have been lights for us to see by. Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Shakespeare," and he goes on, and Gandhi, and Buddha, and Beethoven, and Rembrandt, and St. Francis. Now, what you have just done, if you've just stripped Jesus of his deity, you've just brought him down on the same level as a Buddha. They're just all the great fighters in society. Now, of course, yes, this is a fiction book, but there are a lot of messages that affect their Christian beliefs in that book. One of her adult books, she says, no matter how many eons it takes, he will not rest until all of creation, including Satan, is reconciled to him, until there's no creature who cannot return his look of love with a joyful response of love. She's talking about even Satan, in the end, will be reconciled to God, which, if you read Revelation 20:10, it says, "And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever." Okay? So quite a contradiction there. 1969, Lisa Bright and Dark by John Neufeld, which I was required to read. And it's interesting that the father was a minister, and another man said, "I'm one of those whose church goes in the form of believing in man." And the minister replies, which in theory is the best kind of religion. See how we're weakening our preachers in these books? 1974, Shel Silverstein, who was a cartoonist for Playboy. He wrote this kid's book, and he wrote, "God gave us fingers, Ma says use your fork. God gave us voices, Ma says don't scream." And there's 12 more lines in the same vein, and in the end he concludes, "And I ain't too smart, but there's one thing for certain, either Ma's wrong or else God is." 78.
And, that puts me to mind when we're talking about this Buddha thing and how Jesus basically has been reduced to a Buddha level. Then you turn around and why they're doing that, but then you turn around and you see what they're bringing into the schools now, and we can't go into it today, but it's mindfulness, and that's Goldie Hawn has a Mind Up clinic. This is all of Buddhism. This is Dalai Lama. This is the occult coming in now that your child every day will have to meditate in school to open and expand their mind. But what are you opening and expanding it to? You're expanding it to the occult. So this is why they're having Jesus.
Yes. Yes, and I shouldn't fail to mention how many books there are on occultic themes also in kids' books. They were there even when I was a child in the 60s. In the 80s, it moved on to hardcore New Age messages in kids' books and the Harry Potter type books at that time period also. You have so many other books. I have lists and lists and lists of them here, but each one of them are undermining God, Christianity, or Christians. Most of the books that I read, they'll address God as a he, she, or an it. And here's one from 2003. Even at 13, though I couldn't have put this into words, I understood that my church was a political organization, that its main goal was self-preservation, and that it sold a kind of sameness that was not in my best interest. And that's from the book 13, and that's written on a 5th grade reading level. Another one I think is very striking is 2003, God Went to Beauty School by Cynthia Ryland. God wrote a book. No, not that one. Everybody thinks he wrote that one, but he didn't. And, I have so many examples here. I know we're running out of time, but I want to show you one from 2007, and this one is by a drag queen that Dutton solicited to write a book for them about drag queens for kids. It's written on a 4th grade, 2nd month reading level. And in this book he says, but don't be fooled by the crosses around their necks. These girls are the coldest of all of the cold-blooded killers here today, the worst of the bunch, because when they're being hateful for God. See, these were your Christian girls. Another part of the book, he says, I think about the orphan children who survived the great Afghani earthquake a few years ago. They were sent, of all places, to San Francisco. And after the last big earthquake there, those poor kids have become convinced that God is after them, trying to kill them. And who's to say he isn't?
Well, what is interesting, Debbie, is what you just are reading. If we change that Christian girls to homosexual girls and talked about them that way, we would fall under federal legislation of bullying, anti-bullying legislation, and considered hate speech, which is now considered a crime.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so we can write and have our children read anti-Christian hate speech, but our children are not allowed to voice their Christian opinions about other behaviors that go against their biblical teachings. Is that an accurate statement?
That is absolutely an accurate statement.
Too accurate, Angela.
Yes, but you have to remember your children are being fed, a line here, a line there, a line here, a line there. And this is shaping their point of view. By the time you realize that your children's viewpoints are an antithesis of what you've tried to teach them, it's too late. All of this has already been ingrained in them.
That is the problem.
From
that is the problem. And, how many parents have asked their middle school or teenage children when they came home from school, well, what did you learn today? And the answer is nothing. And the parent doesn't pursue it any further. They say, okay, well, do you have any homework? No. Well, okay, we'll get in the car. We got to get to ball practice.
That's right.
And so we never really sit down with our children and have in-depth discussions. We don't go to the schools and ask questions. And parents need to start doing that to totally understand that this is going on in their child's school. If they would discover it's not, I'd be really surprised, and I'd like to know where that school system is, because we probably have a flood of parents moving to wherever that is.
Yeah, I'd like to see that too.
Debbie,
I'm going to
Alex Awards.
The Alex Awards. Okay, the Alex Awards. Let me find where I am here. Okay, mercy. Okay, but the Alex Awards are awards given by the American Library Association, and they're for books that were written for adults that they feel have special appeal to young adults ages 12 to 18. The winning titles are selected from the previous year's publishing, and the Alex Awards were first annually given beginning in 1998 and became an official American Library Association award in 2002. And I'm just going to mention one of the books since we're out of time, but in 2006, Water for Elephants by Sarah Gruen, and that book is written on a 4th grade, 4th month reading level. And I'm going to read a couple graphic excerpts from that book that's written on a 4th grade, 4th month reading level that the American Library Association deemed to have special appeal for young adults 12 to 18. The woman strides to the center of the stage. She passes the shawl between her legs, slowly grinding against it. She continues, sliding the shawl back and forth, pulling it so tight the cleft of her vulva shows. Then she drops the bra to the floor, spins around, clutching her breasts in her hands. "Ah, come on, I spent 50 cents, page 45. She scoops the breast up to her face and slides her tongue around its nipple. Then she slurps it into her mouth. She stands there shamelessly, sucking her own tit as the men wave their hats. One more. A few small comic books are hidden inside the front cover of the Shakespeare. A crudely drawn Olive Oyl lies on a bed with her legs open, naked but for her shoes. She spreads herself with her fingers. Popeye appears in a thought bubble above her head with a bulging erection that reaches to his chin. Wimpy, with an equally enormous erection, peers through the window. This is the kind of content in a book that they
and these are endorsed by the American Library Association, listeners.
It was given an award.
It was given an award by the American Library Association. Does that tell you anything?
And this is also one that ends up being required or on the summer reading list on quite a few schools.
And that's middle school level, high school?
No, that would be upper grades. That would be high school.
What level are
when
they
I
written
say
on?
fourth grade, fourth month, that's the reading level.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so a fourth grader could read that book, yes. Or
That's
any
what I'm
child
saying.
who learned to read by phonics could read it earlier than that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting. I was speaking to an English teacher a few weeks ago, and she had mentioned to me that she was going to read to her sixth grade class. She was going to have some quiet time and read them a book. And so she went to the library, and they have very few books where they have 30 copies or so every student can have their own book and the teacher can read and they can follow along. So she selected the book Marley and Me. And if you remember the movie, that was the movie about the dog, the golden retriever, that ended up dying at the end of the movie. And I quite frankly don't recall the sex scenes that she is describing is in the printed book. She had no idea. She did not pre-read the book.
Right.
She assumed it would be similar to the movie. And so when she started reading passages that were describing sexual activity and monthly periods and this sort of thing, that's when she said, okay, class, never mind. Let me take the books back up. And so there's not a whole lot of choice for teachers of books to get out of their school libraries when something like Marley and Me that you think is innocent is also going to contain these sexual descriptions.
Yes. And, I haven't even covered, when I talk about homosexuality, you have no idea.
Let's mention some of that now. We have time, so let's mention a little bit of that now, Debbie, while we're at it.
Okay, for example, the David Levison that I gave you one of his illustrations earlier with the profanity, he wrote 21 proms. He edited that book. It's a conglomeration of a bunch of authors. And he wrote this particular story called Lost Sometimes in 21 proms. The opening paragraph, his name was Dutch. These are two boys. We weren't boyfriends, but we screwed all over the place. You name the place. Odds are we screwed there. The gym, Burger King, his grandmother's house. We couldn't stop. We decided to go to the prom together to make a statement and also to see if we could screw there too, in which they did. Okay. Let's see. I had another one I wanted to do. Tricks. You have two lesbian girls, and they ran away, and basically they're working private bachelor parties to earn money. They're teenagers. Our 2-for-1 fee is $300 an hour, plus tips for straight dancing. Private lap dances are $20 per song. Girl-on-girl action adds another $100 to the tab. As for the actual stripping, Lydia gave us some pointers. But Alex and I are tight. I love her heart, her brains, her body. The men we perform for like when we dance with each other breast to breast or belly to ass. Fingers touching hidden places we won't let clients touch. Powerful. That's how I feel, seeing how helpless we make them. I so enjoy reducing them to masturbation. It's like they're masturbating for me, and I can control when they come by how I move my body and what I let them see. It's a game. I win every time. Tricks by Ellen Hopkins. Now, if you go to her site and you read all of her information, she will tell you how many lives she has saved by these books that she's written and how dangerous people like me are.
How does she
Debbie,
say
how
life?
about one book, 2,000 pounds per square inch? I remember that one, too, how great that
okay,
one was.
That's actually not a book. That is on Brent Hardinger's site where he's teaching them about safe sex. So if you go to Brent Hardinger that wrote Geography Club, that is on his site. I would really like to
do it. That's how they would get to that site, is into that information, this 2,000 pounds per square inch that we're talking about. And it's about homosexuality, but that's how they would get to it, listeners, is that you go to that one book, Geography Club, and then all the information of how to get to the site is there. And once you're there, then you can get all this other lovely information.
Well, you know, it kind of reminds me, Debbie, back in when Bill Clinton was going.
Oops, we lost Angela. She'll be back. Just a little technical difficulty there. But yeah, this is how, you know, we were discussing, Debbie, of how parents. I really want the listeners to understand how your kids are getting to these links and to this information. It's not necessarily you're going to go pick up a book and there it's going to be and you're going to see, oh, gosh, look at all this homosexuality stuff. Look at all this sex. Look at this. No. And we're just touching on these, so kids' literature books. We haven't gone into, you know, other topics of what's happening to our children with Islamization and all of that, and we'll get into that in other shows. But understand
those
how. Go ahead,
those
Debbie.
are all in kids' books, too.
Exactly. Well, you want to touch on that a little bit, and we can pursue that in another show also. But touch on that a little bit. We've got some time.
Well, I tell you, I was absolutely astounded at how many books that are available on Islam. And those, I think it would take a whole show just to deal on the Islamic issue on that. But I was just absolutely positively
and then we'll do another one. We'll back and we'll talk about that at great length. But let's just touch on it.
I would really like to close with two other topics that kind of run together. And one is the transgender issue. I didn't even read you the graphic homosexuality. They have every act and every sound, everything in the kids' books dealing with homosexuality. But there's also the transgender issue. And Luna by Julianne Peters, who's also a lesbian, in fact, she basically says that Luna came to her at night, so she was a demon, and kept bothering her and waking her up at night and she finally said, "What is it? What is it?" And Luna said, "You know, what's your story?" And she says, "I'm a transgender." So she wrote this book, Luna, and it's about a boy who believes he's a girl. And I'll read the opening passage. He says, Lim grabs his penis and starts to pull. "Take it off," he says, and repeats, "Take it off, take it off." "Take what off? Where are your swim trunks?" "Mommy, take it off." He pulls it himself again. "Stop that." Mom slaps his hand away. "That's nasty." "No," he whines. "I want it off. Take it off, take it off, take it off." And he starts slapping at his penis and stamping his feet and throwing a fit. "You stop that, young man. Stop it." And he says, "No, I am not a young man." And then later, he cut his leg. "All I see is the blood running down her leg." She knew. So he tried to cut his penis off. That was when he was probably 5 or so. And then it goes on until finally the kid, you know, is growing up and he's going to go away for the Harry Benjamin standards of, you know, sexual reconstruction. The other books, Girl to Girl. And here's one where she believes that she's a boy. She has her cousin go to a sex shop and buy her a packer, and they talk about it was $4 an inch, and it was the happiest day of her life. We have another one called Almost Perfect that a librarian actually wrote this story, and this one actually details the hormonal treatment and the whole ball of wax, so the child would know exactly what to do. Is Angela back?
She's on.
I'm back.
Okay. And I want to. This is the last issue I want to close with. Are the what I call the donorships. And you see, now we have a whole new can of worms open up to our children. Donor Boy was written in 2004, 10 years ago, and this is about a little girl who had two lesbian moms. They were killed in a car accident, and so the sperm donor actually takes guardianship of her. But, of course, they have a happy ever after ending. 2006, between Mom and Joe.
Donors, and we didn't discuss any of the sperm donors and that type of information that, who's your mommy and who's your daddy? Oh, I don't know. I'm an egg.
Well, I'm getting to that one. I have the two last. The one little boy in between Mom and Joe from 2006 says, do you know who my father is? And one of his lesbian moms says, he's a syringe full of sperm. And then the one that you're referring to is from 2002, and it's called What Makes a Baby by Corey Silverberg. It's a 32-page book for preschool children to 8 years. And this book has pictures where you cannot tell where it's a man or a woman. They just either have an egg or a sperm inside, but that does not make them a male or a female. He explains that. He explains that to have a baby, you need an egg, you need a sperm, and you need a uterus. And what's unique is there's no mention of boy, girl, man, woman, mother, or father. So it's open-ended to discuss all the ways that a baby may have been conceived. And so he developed a reader's guide for parents, and the guide is about 60 pages. And on page 47, he even states that gender may not be fixed, but fluid for some, meaning it always changes. And in page 15, he explains that some men have ovaries and some women have sperm, these being trans men or trans women. And on page 29, he describes a lesbian mom explaining that she donated the egg, Uncle Jack the sperm in a cup, and then she helped the other lesbian inject the sperm into her vagina.
And why do we suppose our children need to learn all of these things?
Very good question, Angela. Very good question. And I think it's one that parents need to be thinking about.
Exactly. So we're just continuously trying to acclimate our children into lifestyles that are everything but your typical family of a mom and a dad and children. Every other family is just really pushed onto our children. And I found it interesting the other day. I was listening to a radio show, and it was a technology conference in Boston, I believe, and there was a Japanese engineer on the show, and he talked about how all the children in Japan are so into the technology that they don't have any interest any longer of getting out and actually socializing with other human beings in person. All their interaction is done on their iPhones or their iPads or emails. And so they're very concerned about the population of Japan declining to the point that whole cities disappear. And he said the problem is that the parents don't see anything wrong with the technology either because they grew up with it. So we're entering into a world where our children are just immersed into this mindset of there's no need to even have a typical family anymore, mom and dad, when we all know that really and truly is the most successful families, is to have both parents. So I just find it interesting that they're changing our children's minds and their values so subtly that parents don't even realize what's going on.
Well, again,
they don't realize it until it's too late.
Agenda. That's part of the agenda. And Debbie can go into, well, we don't have time today, but another time, we need to touch on this Kinsey stuff as well. Where does a lot of this stuff come from? And that will be reserved for another show when we have Debbie back. And we'll talk about Islam. And those different things. But, it's just parents really need to know what is going on, and that's what we're hoping to do here with Operation Jericho Project Radio, is bring you the truth of what's going on. Not just sound bites, not just your basic, watered over, glossed over, Common Core is bad, and, the math is terrible. As you can hear today, the math is the least of your problems. It's what they're putting in front of your child. And as we all know, Angela and Debbie, this is an agenda. There is an agenda behind this, and that is the reason for all of these things. Leading the children away from God, leading us away from all the moral standing we ever had in our nation to become an amoral nation. And that's, look around. It's just,
and
it's
turning
really
them against their parents as well, because the parents are so unenlightened. We wouldn't understand any of these things that they're being taught in school. And so turning them away from God, turning them away from their structure, their family structure, so that they're just dependent on the federal government.
Right. And that's the agenda. Let's remember one thing, that the mission statement from UNESCO, education should aim at destroying free will, so that after the student has left school, they will only be able to think and do as their schoolmasters would have wished. I don't read anywhere in there where it talks about parents or parental rights or home values or what you teach your children at home. None of that. They don't care. You are really obsolete as far as they're concerned, parents. They're not your children. They're state.
Exactly so. And Christina, as we point out on every show, this will not be fixed quickly. And every year, parents, that you leave your child in this system, these are the kind of things they're being exposed to. You cannot think that just because your legislature passes a bill to withdraw from Common Core, that all of this ideology and sexualization and pro-Islamization, all of this is going to disappear overnight, because it's too enmeshed in every textbook. The teachers have been trained in it. You're not going to escape what we've been talking about. It is time to move your children out of the government-run schools, put them into private Christian education, and be sure you check out that Christian school as well. Homeschool them, whatever you can do. And that's why we're all calling on our children.
I had a mother today, Angela, tell me that, because I was talking to her about just this thing. As a matter of fact, I gave her Operation Jericho Project's website and the link to the radio show, because she has a daughter that rides at the barn where my horses are. And so we got to talk. She said, I'd be terrible at homeschooling. I said, no, you wouldn't. I said, that's what every parent, I'm not capable. I didn't, I dropped out of college. I said, I don't care. I said, you just don't realize how easy it is and how good it would be. I was telling her about Freedom Project Education just as one example. And I said, and she's a Christian, and I said, no Christian parent should have their child in the government system, which is nothing but Satan controlled. I said, because there is this agenda, and we talk about it every week. This is why. There's an agenda, so you're not going to get rid of it. And as we've talked most of the weeks, Angela, everybody, they haven't gotten rid of anything. Don't be fooled by your governors that sit there and say, we've gotten rid of Common Core. No, they are just rebranding. It's still there. It's just going to come in under a different name, a different guise. Pay attention, because it's not going away. As Angela mentioned, the agenda comes out of UNESCO, the United Nations. It doesn't come from us. We are just being the pawns in this game. Of course, our government is involved for sure, and it doesn't matter what party you are. This is not about politics. This is about the children, because it doesn't matter. Both parties are involved in this. As a matter of fact, you've got the so-called conservative Republicans pushing this like crazy. So we've got to understand, we the parents are going to be the ones that are going to have to take control and make sure.
And one of these days, Christina, we've got to have Debbie back on the show to talk about homeschooling, because Debbie, you started homeschooling your children. How many years ago was that?
Well, my children were, part of the years were in private schools. They had a couple of years in public schools, but Ashley had one semester was all she had in a public school. But two of mine went all the way through graduating high school and then went to college.
And so did you have a PhD in education when you started homeschooling your children?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. But I have a friend who is a teacher, and we laugh so much of the time and say, hey, we got our education when we homeschooled our children. We learned so much. It's the most exciting time of a parent's life. Honestly, it's the best years.
And you know
well,
what,
you
Debbie?
know, and I also,
we are going to have you back on to talk about it, because I would love for people to hear some of your creative ideas of how you did teach your kids certain things, just creatively. I mean, it was not out of a textbook. And look at Mary that we had on last week, Mary Hood. She never had a curriculum book up until high school, and everything was done in a very creative way. So, you know, don't sit there and say, I can't do it, because yes, you can. And first of all, if you're a Christian, you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
That is right. And also, parents, I mean, remember, you're probably homeschooling with children and you just don't know it. When you're helping them with their homework at night, what do you think you're doing? You're homeschooling. So you can do it. And there's a lot of resources that we have at OperationJerichoProject.com. Visit our website, click on the link that says Alternatives to Government Education, and we've listed all kinds of resources there for you. Online curriculums such as Freedom Education Project that have been vetted, that is a good classical education, but lots of resources there. Check it out. See for yourself what your alternatives are, and then do whatever you can for your family to get your children out of the government-run system. If you have to give up your cable TV, do you have to give up some of your very expensive recreational activities? Do you need to downsize your car to something less expensive? Whatever you need to do, but think about it. You're making those sacrifices for your children and your children's future. And many homeschooling parents will tell you that it's difficult at the beginning, but you adjust and you find out it's the best thing you ever did. So I just encourage you to consider that before school starts back up this coming August.
Amen. So, Debbie, we're coming, well, unfortunately, you guys, we're at the end of the show. It goes so fast. And we have so much more to share with you. So Debbie will definitely be coming back on because we have so much to cover on this topic. We can't possibly cover it in one show. But, Debbie, before we go, would you please, give some parting words or thoughts or what you'd like to tell the listeners?
Yes, I would like to address one thing. When you're talking about homeschooling and these other issues, parents, you love your children more than anybody else does. And one pattern that I am seeing coming through with children's books and in other areas is they're trying to convince the children that, Bessie next door is as much a mother to your child as you are. They're making the it takes a village argument with the children. They've lost all respect for you as a parent, and, and the state has taken over. And I'm just asking you just to reconsider, reclaim, reinstate that bond with your own children, and it'll be the best thing you've ever done.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie, for being on our show and all that you do with your research to help us understand. You've done years and years of research that you can find on our website. We have a whole page with Debbie's research on our website, and I'll put the link to that page on our radio show notes so that you can find that and learn more about what Debbie has researched and has presented for us.
And, well, thank you for having me.
We just are so happy to have you, share all this with the listeners, Debbie. And, again, we want to encourage all the listeners to share this podcast and also go on and like us on Facebook. at Facebook.com/Operation Jericho Project. And definitely visit our website at www.operationjerichoproject.com and avail yourself of the information there. Believe me, you can spend hours and hours and hours and days, but you will come away understanding the what's, whys, and the where of all of this, where you can make a better educated decision for your child. But it's becoming more and more imperative that we get them out of this indoctrination system, because their very hearts and minds are being destroyed by this federal government. And so we really hope that you will share these podcasts with many. We want to thank you for joining us, and we hope that